Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Hey, listen, is it a thing of fiction or is it real? A missile that will go to several times the speed of sound, and it can range around the world without refueling. It has a nuclear warhead, and it can go around for, as I say, forever, fueled by nuclear power. Have the Russians got something like that? One of them crashed, and there's a fear of radiation fallout. But is this a possibility? We're looking at the beginning of a new arms race with one of America's oldest enemies. It's a shocking, amazing story. Jennifer Wisham has that.
Observers believe an explosion that killed 5 Russian scientists during a recent test involved a nuclear-powered weapon, a missile capable of delivering warheads at great range and high speeds. Russians call it the Berezovnik. Defense experts say it's a wake-up call.
The biggest nuclear threat remains Russia because they're the only other country with an arsenal that does pose an existential threat to the United States.
Last year, Russian President Vladimir Putin unveiled the development of Berezovnik, dubbed Skyfall by NATO. A vengeance weapon is how Russia's government newspaper describes it, one designed to target remaining vital infrastructure after Russia's intercontinental ballistic missiles have already struck enemy territory. Putin says Skyfall's nuclear propulsion would give it unlimited range and the ability to strike quickly. However, there's been a lot of trouble in its development. Last week's explosion was followed by a spike in radiation in a nearby city. President Trump responded, tweeting, "The United States is learning much from the failed missile explosion in Russia. We have similar, though more advanced technology." The Russian Skyfall explosion has people worried about the air around the facility and far beyond. Not good. Many experts are skeptical Skyfall will ever be perfected. But if the Russians can pull it off, they agree it's impractical for anything short of all-out nuclear war.
We've grown very complacent about this because since 1945, nobody has used nuclear weapons in anger. And so I think there's a tendency to think no one will ever do this.
After years of alleged Russian violations, the U.S. formally withdrew from the INF Treaty, which aimed to reduce the arsenal of nuclear weapons by both sides. If Russians do succeed in making Skyfall work, they'll likely build hundreds of them, which could launch a new Cold War-style arms race. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Jennifer. You know, the GDP of Russia is something comparable to Delaware. They're not a big economic power, and all they've got is oil to sell. So they're in desperate financial trouble. They're a tiny little country, but what Putin wants to do is expand the old Russian Empire. He said the fall of communism was the greatest geopolitical disaster in history. He wants more of what they had before. That means that the Baltic countries he wants to take over, and he wants to take over the Ukraine. He wants to expand into the old Russian territory. But all he's got is nuclear, but he's got powerful nuclear weapons. He has an arsenal of nuclear weapons that is something comparable to what we have in the United States. So what is he saying? Don't push me around. His skill is judo. Judo is to let somebody else bigger than you are attack you and then use their own weight to destroy them. He's not a chess player. He's a judo player. Actually was a judo champion in his early days. So that's what he does. He's going to wait for us to take our weight and then push against him, and then he'll use that against us. That's the way he's going to play it. But this development is very frightening. If they can deliver nuclear missiles anywhere in the globe at supersonic speed, it's an extraordinary development. And something that I don't know what to do except to pray, because you need the Lord to help you. And Donald Trump is saying, yes, we've got comparable technology, and it may mean we better get with it to develop, because you hate to see another nuclear arms race, but we have no other choice. Well, in other news, protesters in Hong Kong shut down the airport for a second day. And China is sending signals that it must stop. John Jessup has more.
That's right, Pat. Protesters crowded inside the airport, forcing the cancellation of outbound flights for the second day in a row. Hong Kong's airport is one of the busiest in the world with 1,100 flights daily. The protesters are calling for greater democracy and less control from mainland China. Twitter caught a few waving American flags and singing the Star-Spangled Banner. Meanwhile, Chinese military vehicles are gathering in Shenzhen, a city about 15 miles from Hong Kong's border. Beijing has warned the protesters that it might take action. Market watchers point to the instability in Hong Kong for a fall in Asian stocks, saying it could have an impact on U.S. and global markets. Well, the U.S. budget deficit rose by $183 billion in July. That's a 27% increase over the same time period last year. The deficit for the first 10 months of fiscal 2019 now stands at $867 billion. That's larger than last year's total $779 billion deficit. And the White House is projecting the federal deficit this year will exceed $1 trillion. Average Americans are also deep in the hole. The American Bankruptcy Institute reports total household debt near $14 trillion. And Pat, that includes student loans and mortgages, and more consumers are filing bankruptcy to escape the burden of debt.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you just realized that is the greatest threat facing our nation right now, fiscal collapse. It's so near. If we are continually profligate, sooner or later, the Chinese and the Russians and the Arabs and others will stop taking our dollars, and our interest rates will go up, and it will consume virtually all of the federal budget. If that debt gets back to normal levels, there won't be any room in our fiscal budget for anything else except debt service. It is a major threat, and it's a weapon right at the head and the heart of America. And yet it seems like nobody in Congress wants to deal with it. The administration doesn't want to deal with it. Everybody wants to spend, spend, spend. And the guys at home think, well, I want more, more, and more. Well, you can't have more and more and more without having bankruptcy. And nations can go bankrupt as well as individuals. And it's something that you've got to be aware of. Now, along the way, the president says, look, people are not going to come to this country and freeload. We're not going to give them all the benefits if they're illegal. So let's look at what he's doing. John?
Pat, the Trump administration is changing legal immigration rules, making it easier to deny green cards to applicants deemed likely to rely on welfare programs like food stamps and subsidized housing. But critics say the change makes it harder for low-income immigrants to secure permanent residency. CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy explains.
The White House says this change is meant to ensure that people who come to the U.S. and are granted permanent status will not be a burden on the country.
And President Trump has once again delivered on his promise.
That promise, immigration reform. This round focuses on public charge.
Through the public charge rule, President Trump's administration is reinforcing the ideals of self-sufficiency and personal responsibility.
Caseworkers will now consider if immigrants would rely on government benefits like housing, food, and Medicaid before approving citizenship status. Opponents say the change only makes it easier to deny green cards. The Department of Homeland Security released a statement in part saying DHS acknowledges that one likely outcome of this change is that some individuals who may have been able to immigrate under the 1999 interim field guidance will now be deemed inadmissible as likely public charges. In a recent interview with CBN News, acting USCIS Director Kevin Cuccinelli told us that the White House crackdown aims to cut down on the potential economic burden of immigrants entering the country.
A lot of people aren't even close. They know they don't have an asylum case. They want to come here for economic reasons. Those are not asylum reasons. Asylum is about protection from persecution.
That's why asylum seekers and refugees are an exception to this change. So are children, pregnant women, and active duty military members. The change could impact hundreds of thousands who immigrate here each year.
I'm certainly not prepared to take anything down off the Statue of Liberty. We have a long history of being one of the most welcoming nations in the world.
Now, the change won't go into effect until October. But bottom line, the White House wants people coming to the U.S. to eventually contribute to this country instead of relying on benefits covered by the American taxpayer. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, the White House.
Thanks, Ben. In other news, more extreme weather striking parts of the nation from the south to the Midwest with scorching temperatures. The heat index Monday was 121 in Clarksdale, Mississippi. West Memphis, Arkansas hit 119 degrees. Dallas reached a high of 109, and Birmingham, Alabama peaked at 106 degrees. More is in store for Tuesday. Meteorologists say severe storms will follow the heat from the nation's capital across to parts of Tennessee and Arkansas. Well, the shootings in El Paso and Dayton have sparked a national debate on mental illness and gun control. What often isn't discussed is how communities deal with the aftermath after these tragic events once the glare of the media spotlight dims and leaves town. Charlene Aaron shares how one group is using kindness to help grieving cities heal.
The Honor Network performs simple acts of kindness as a way to honor and remember victims of mass shootings, one city at a time. The wheels of this Pay It Forward van travel the country to help communities heal by focusing on people.
We try to spread kindness around in honor of the victims. It's kind of like coming into the town and giving the whole town a really big hug.
Each random act includes a small marker with words "Believe there is good in the world" and a card with each victim's name. The network has traveled to cities such as Parkland, Florida, Santa Fe, Texas, and as far away as New Zealand, where 51 people were killed earlier this year. In an interview with CBN News, Tommy Mayer, a fire commissioner in New York, said he started the organization after personal loss.
This goes all the way back to September 11th. We lost a guy in my firehouse, fellow firefighter and a good friend of mine, Joe Hunter. Everyone coming from all around the world just to help us really had an impact on me. And I knew that one day I would do something to pretty much pay it back.
That desire recently brought Mayor to Virginia Beach to honor the 12 people killed on May 31st at the city's municipal center.
We went around the town, honored all 12 people that were killed on that day. And we also stopped by the police department, firehouse, and the 911 switchboard operators to thank them for all they did on that day.
Virginia Beach Mayor Bobby Dyer says long after the media moves on from the story, it's important to remember the victims and those still affected.
We must remember not only the victims, but the victims' families. We must also remember 4 people were tragically wounded, but especially, let's not forget the 300 plus people that were in Building 2 at that time that witnessed this carnage, that are going to have memories for the rest of their life.
Another stop included a local McDonald's, where an employee received a Bible in remembrance of Virginia Beach employee Keith Cox, who helped save others before he was killed. 2 customers at Pungo Surf Shop received free surfboard repairs in the name of Alex Gustev, an avid surfer.
I've had their boards for a while just because they haven't had money to pick them up.
Mayor hopes his message spreads not just because of evil, but because of good.
2 of the greatest, most powerful acts of kindness are understanding and forgiveness. And we could do that without having to buy anybody anything.
If we're going to defeat evil, let's do random acts of kindness. Let's be kinder to each other.
The Honor Network plans a stop in El Paso and Dayton, Ohio in the near future. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Simple but powerful acts of kindness. Pat, back to you.
That's what we need. We need to love one another. Isn't that what the Lord said? You know, love one another. Love is of God. And anyhow, can it start? I think the answer is yes. We cannot be overcome with hate and evil. And I know there's a lot of it in the world, but we don't seek retribution and destruction. We see kindness and love. It's really wonderful. By the way, speaking of kindness, we're kind of like the big oil producer of the world now. It's not Saudi Arabia, it's the United States of America. And it all centers in something in Texas called the Permian Basin, which may be the oil future of the world.